Good evening. Although my plan was definitely to do 100 stories for this video, I have been unable to do that for a couple reasons. The major reason is I did not get 100 paranormal submissions. Yet. But I do plan on eventually getting us to 100 stories. We'll call this part 1, and build upon it in future installments. I'm sure the video is long enough, and I hope that you will enjoy it. Kaidan number 1. My apartment. I'm gonna begin with my own story, and I have previously recorded this story, but as this was originally meant to be the first Kaidan, I am recording it here. I should start by telling you that I am a skeptic. I am not a skeptic that has become a believer. I was a believer who has become a skeptic. I have no idea what actually happened to me here. I accept the possibility that this was all in my head, that it was due to mental illness or something else. I don't know what it was, but the only thing I can tell you is that from my perspective, this really happened. When I was 26, I met a friend who was into ghosts and hauntings like I was. His name was Toby, and I discovered that he was also into Ouija boards, something I have never believed in. Well, when I met Toby, we stayed up late into the night talking. He was obsessed with the Ouija boards, and up until about 6 months prior to us meeting, he would not get out of bed in the morning before checking his board. He quit though, due to what he told me was a constant intrusion in his life from spirits. He got rid of his board and moved, and had not seen a ghost in half a year. We talked so late that I slept over at his house. We were in the same room, and I woke up about 3 in the morning because I heard a laughing sound. We were alone, so I assumed it was my imagination. But then, Toby woke up and asked me what was so funny. I told him nothing, and he went back to sleep. Well, from that point on, things were rough for both of us. Toby told me that he thought I was sensitive to spirits, and that having me in his home brought them back, so he didn't want to hang out with me anymore. In irritation, I decided to get my own Ouija board and try it out to prove it was a bunch of baloney. I tried it, and of course, it did absolutely nothing. I had lost a potentially good friend over what I assumed to be nothing more than an active imagination. The following night, I went into my bedroom to go to sleep, and the weirdest thing happened. The very moment I turned the light off, I was filled with a feeling of absolute terror. Now, I spend the majority of my time in the dark, and I walk around in the dark all the time. But for some reason, I was scared out of my mind, and I didn't know why. I turned my light on and looked over at my bed, and it terrified me. I wanted to creep over to it and look under it, but could not bring myself to do it. Instead, I ran over and jumped onto the bed and curled up against the wall until the sun came up. My friend Matt came to visit me the next day. He was always coming over, and I practically let him live like he was my roommate. We always watched movies several times a week. He wanted to leave no longer than 20 minutes after being in my apartment. He told me he felt like he was going to throw up, and he just needed to get out. When he left, He later told me he felt better, right when he left my building. I wasn't happy being alone that night. Again, I was scared of my apartment. I couldn't sleep with the light on, so I repeated the process of turning the light out and running and jumping on my bed. As I lay on my bed, I curled up. I could have sworn I saw these little pinpricks of light just spontaneously appearing in the closet. I tried to explain it as being due to my lack of sleep from being so afraid the past couple of days. Over the next couple days, the strange events continued. I absolutely hated being in my apartment. As I lay in bed each night, I began visualizing these images seemingly against my will. One included me seeing this really fat man with burned and scarred skin and rotted teeth walking past my bedroom door and turning to smile at me. It wasn't something I saw with my eyes. I am not sure how to describe it, but it was like it was shoved into my head. When I would watch TV and need to go up and go to the bathroom, I would find my shower curtain closed. Seems like I could have done that myself, right? Except that I haven't kept a shower curtain closed in my life. I hated it because it terrified me. So I would open the curtain, go back and sit down, and an hour later walk back into the bathroom and find it closed again. And I'd open it back. And when I returned later, I found my entire roll of toilet paper unraveled. After nearly a month of this torment, it finally came to a head. I was getting ready for work in the morning and taking a shower. I had the curtain open a little bit like I always did. As I was washing my hair, getting it good and lathered up, my eyes looked over at the wall, right outside of the curtain. I immediately saw the shadow of a human arm on the wall, coming right toward the curtain. Quickly, I threw the curtain open, and there was no one there. But I know that I saw it. I crept out, washed my hair out in the sink, dressed, and left with my back to the wall. I didn't go back to my apartment for nearly a week. My friend suggested I burn the Ouija board, and I let him do it. As I mentioned before, I don't believe in those things, and I really don't believe it had anything to do with what was going on. But it was possible that having it there was a strong influence of suggestion, and that made these things happen. I don't know. All I know is that it was hell for a short period of time, and whether it means I was hallucinating or what, I don't know. But I know I saw that hand coming for the shower curtain. I had been in the process of buying the apartment when the building went condo, but I dropped out of the deal and found a new place. I was much happier there. When I was 17 years old, my sister and I took a CNA class to work at one of the local nursing homes. I was very young, and honestly, didn't know what to expect. But I can tell you, it is not the kind of job you would expect it to be. They had me start on day shift, and asked me to work midnights. It didn't bother me because I was a night owl, and it was more money anyway. It was my first night on midnights, and I was put on 300 Hall by myself. The hallway itself is a long, narrow corridor that had at least 48 rooms on both sides. I was making my rounds at around 1 a.m. when I came out of a room and grabbed my linen carts to proceed down the hall. As soon as I looked up, I saw a little girl run across the hallway wearing a green dress. I ran down to the nursing station on 100 Hall and proceeded to tell the nurse what I had just seen. She jokingly said that I needed to do a drug test since I am seeing ghosts and shit. Afterwards, the staff were telling me that many people have seen the ghost of this little girl. They also said that there was a ghost of a man wearing a trench coat that would follow the girl, but I never did see him. One of the night workers named Karen was even seen talking to the spirit of the girl, and even brought her a doll as a token of peace. I worked the night shift there for a couple of years, and the most strange thing about the whole situation were the Alzheimer's patients. They weren't all the way there, as you know, but they would tell me all the time, "There was a little girl in here. Where did she go?" Every time I heard that, I would get the hell out of there. Honestly, they are not as crazy as most people believe. 9/11, Market Street. As a child, I have always seen things that others could not see. Growing up in a pretty normal household, there wasn't really a lot of activity in my childhood home. I remember one night, my father and I were watching TV. I noticed that he was watching the doorway in the kitchen. He turned and looked at me and said, "Do you see them too?" I looked into the dark kitchen and could see what appeared to be various figures moving around. They weren't corporeal, but more like shadows, sort of dancing around. It was extremely weird for me to witness this, because I was so young at the time. I had no idea what to think of it. I pretty much just brushed it off. One night I couldn't sleep, so I went into my parents' bedroom and climbed into bed with them. In their bedroom, the entrance to the attic was right by their bed. I woke up in the middle of the night again and saw an orb come down from the attic and disappear into the floor right next to me. I didn't tell them about it because, again, I didn't know what to think. Another time, my sister and I were home alone while my parents were at work. My sister was enjoying her playtime in her room by herself, so I was entertaining myself by listening to music and laying on the air hockey table in my parents' bedroom. Sometime between my dancing and singing, I looked up at the doorway, and for a split second, I could have sworn I saw a man standing there. I jumped off the air hockey table instantly, and when I looked up again, there was nothing there. I went to see my sister and asked her if she saw anything, and she told me she hadn't. She was really scared, so we called my uncle, who came over and searched the house, but no one was found. I never felt any sort of negative energy in that house. It was just a few instances where I knew that we weren't the only ones living there. 111, Lindsay. Soon after living at 911 Market, my parents got a divorce, and my father didn't want to live in that house any longer. He found an older home on Lindsay Avenue. I remember the first day my sister and I got to see it. I got a weird feeling just from being outside of it. My dad, however, was really excited, so I pretended to not be so upset about having to move. We began remodeling it before we were moved in. My cousins Jeremy and Justin were there helping my sister, Dad, and I with painting all of the rooms. Jeremy was working on painting my bedroom, while my sister, Justin, and I were painting the bathroom with the door shut. I suddenly got the feeling that I should open the door. As soon as I opened the door, a glowing, white figure glided by and into my bedroom. All three of us witnessed this event, and I am personally happy that they did. We ran out of there, and asked Jeremy if he saw anything. He was confused and said no, of course not. We ran into the kitchen where my dad was, and told him what happened. I don't really remember his reaction. I just wanted to make sure he wasn't wearing white. We continued fixing up the place, and we ripped up the carpet in the living room. When we did, I found a picture of an older woman sitting in a chair with those old big frame glasses. And just looking at the picture just gave me the creeps. I looked at my sister and said, maybe she is the figure that we saw that night. There is no way we can ever know, but I really am glad that I wasn't the only one who saw it. Another nursing home story. I was working at this nursing home for 2 years on the midnight shift. 2 full years of not having any experiences with the paranormal whatsoever. That is until one strange night. I was working on a round with my partner. The hallway we were working on was an L shape, so I started it on the shorter end. In the first room I was in, I had the curtain pulled for privacy while tending to the patient. When I was finished, I saw in the corner of my eye what looked like pale white feet walk by. I went out into the hallway and saw no one in sight. I found my partner on the other end of the hallway and told her what I just saw. It was really creeping me out, and there was no upper body at all. She brushed me off and went into another room. I rounded the corner of the hallway and continued to work on the hall. I went into the first room on the left, and the same exact thing happened again. I saw the pale white feet walk by and go down the hallway. I then told her what just happened yet again. This time she was wondering what the hell was going on. I didn't care if she thought I was crazy. I wanted to see if she was seeing anything too. I went into the last room at the end of the hall on the right. I was helping the woman in the first bed with the privacy curtain pulled. This time, I saw the pale white feet, only they were actually in the room with me. As soon as they walked past the curtain, all of a sudden there was a loud bang. It sounded like someone had kicked the air conditioner really hard or something. I ran around the curtain to see what had occurred, but nothing was out of place. There were no feet, only a patient who was in a deep sleep. Clara heard the bang and came in and asked what had happened. I told her about the strange feet again, and she said, there has to be some sort of spirits in here. It is the place that people go to right before they pass away. Assisted living. After all of my experience in working in nursing homes, I finally found a job that I wish I had found a long time ago. The stress was all gone that I had previously endured for 5 years, and I was finally happy going to work. Midnight shift was the only position hiring, but of course I didn't mind. I love working nights, and this job was perfect for me. The entire shift, I would be working by myself until 4 a.m., when a woman from day shift would come in to start early. I was completely okay with working by myself for once. It's the best way to know that the job was going to get done. The assisted living facility was a giant square-shaped building with a courtyard directly in the middle. Each resident had their own apartment and mostly just slept throughout the night. My job was mostly cleaning, with a long list of chores to do, including making rounds around the building to make sure everything was in order. Doing rounds was pretty easy. It was just a feeling of uneasiness that came with it when I got to a specific hallway. Every time I would walk on it, I would feel like someone was watching. I would even hear footsteps directly behind me. But when I would look, there was no one there at all. Strange noises were pretty common throughout the night, and I grew accustomed to them. All entrances were locked, so I had no problem worrying about possible intruders or anything like that. I remember hearing voices outside the laundry room one night. It sounded like two women whispering to each other. I couldn't make out what they were saying. I honestly thought it was some of the residents out in the hallway. When I stepped out of the laundry room, they stopped, rather abruptly. I peered around the corner, and not a soul was in sight. One night, an evening cook came in around 10 p.m. to get some of the leftover birthday cake from earlier that day. We got to talking, and so she was following me while I was doing my rounds and duties. I was finishing up, folding the kitchen towels, and we stepped out into the hallway. As soon as I turned left towards the main dining room, we saw a large figure go into the dining room. The hallway was pretty long, and the figure was pretty tall. I looked at her and said, "Did you just see that?" She said, "I saw something, but I'm not sure what it was." We both reluctantly went down the hall, and then into the dining room and kitchen area to search for anyone, but no one was there. I was just relieved that someone else witnessed this with me. After so many strange occurrences, I questioned my sanity quite a bit. So when I was 10, me and my family were moving from our old apartment to a near one near the end of the town, and we were dropping some stuff off. My mom told me to stay in the car, and that she'll be right back. So where we were was basically parked in a two-sided parking lot, and I was in the far left side of the parking lot. Not parked in space, but basically in the middle of the lot, and I was in the passenger seat, looking at all the kids playing. Then I noticed on my right side, between two cars, there was a girl, just standing there, staring at me. And the thing that shook me and scared me was the fact that her face was terribly deformed. And when I was young, I was never introduced to that sort of thing, and I was a really easily frightened kid. Like if I saw Chuck from Chuck E. Cheese walking out, I would start crying and hiding under a table. Yeah, I was really that scared. So basically, when I ducked down from seeing that girl, I was freaking out, scared out of my mind. And when I looked back up, she was gone. And when I ducked down, it was less than 15 seconds. So I decided to ask the kids who were playing near her if they saw the girl with the deformed face. They shrugged and said they didn't see anyone besides themselves. So I moved in quickly, made many friends in the neighborhood, and I kept asking around if anyone ever seen or heard of a girl with a deformed face. She looked roughly around 12 to 13 years old. So everyone just told me that they'd never heard or seen anyone like that. So until this day, I keep wondering to myself, was that a ghost I saw, or a hallucination? I guess I'll never know. Room at the Mermaid Inn. I belong to a small literary group, the E.F. Benson Society. We meet up every summer in Rye, in East Sussex in the UK. We have a feast of a lunch, a stroll around the picturesque town discussing Fred Benson's characters, his stories, the naughty things he got up to, and then have another feast, my favorite, afternoon tea. 2 years ago, an actor, Richard Crowest, joined us and a few bottles of chilled white wine to read 2 short stories in the Garden of Lamb house, where Benson had scripted them. Knowing this event was upcoming, I suggested to my friend that we stay overnight in Rye, and we could take a couple of rooms over the road from Lamb House and the Mermaid Inn. Now, I knew the Mermaid Inn had a reputation for being haunted, but to be honest, everywhere and everyone and their mums is haunted in the UK, so I took it with a big pinch of salt. I just wanted to stay close to our venue and spend the night in a big 4-poster bed in an amazing 700-year-old building. It's not that I don't believe in ghosts. I was just focused on taking 2 jolly days out of London and relaxing with friends. Come the day, I got my wish. I was allocated the room called Kingsmill, and as I plopped my bag down, I was delighted to see a big 4-poster in a spacious room. All was in order. The black beams, an old carved stone fireplace, low ceilings and squeaky floorboards. A little bathroom down a passageway. The sun, sparkling through a line of ancient leaded lights, gave the room a golden glow, and you could open them up wide onto the tiny courtyard. From the courtyard came the tinkling sound of a mermaid fountain, occasionally interrupted only by the guttural call of seagulls. Everything you'd expect from a medieval public house was there, and with a bathroom to boot. My friend had a room somewhere else in the maze of little stairways, and neither of us knew how to get to the other. My friend said jokingly as we parted in the evening, "If I see a ghost, I'm not going to be very happy. I shall come and bang on your door." We laughed, and I said, "You'll never find me. Call me if you're worried. I have my phone switched on." Whereas I'm relaxed about the afterlife, my friend really doesn't want it bothering him while he's still with the living. In the evening, I returned to my room after our lovely reading in the garden. The delightful ambience that had greeted me earlier in the day was totally absent. The room was gloomy, and the atmosphere heavy, almost oppressive. The dark beams that were so defined during the sunlit day now held deep shadows. The windows were still open as I had left them, and I could still hear the fountain below, but the sound was slightly annoying. Beyond all these things, however, I was boiling hot. All of me was hot, not the room. Me. I was beyond just hot, and I was wound up and restless for no reason. A cold shower and hot cup of tea later, I sat in bed wondering why I wasn't sleeping after a long day of eating and socializing, and why was I sweltering again when I had a big fan aimed at me and windows wide open at midnight. I felt as though I was boiling up from the inside and unable to do anything about it. Somebody near the fireplace was watching me, so I had left the bathroom light on and pulled the door closed enough to illuminate that corner. I don't mind being watched, but I just could have done without it. The dead always seemed to be watching. The previous and dead owner of my mother's last house was always hanging about, watching and being disapproving. She yelled at me when I slept on the dining room floor the day I helped my mother move out. "Oh, for goodness sake," she bellowed from the kitchen door. Anyway, this lady was silent, and being watched is nothing to be bothered about. But lighting the place a bit can be very helpful, and I had a night-timer thrashing about in boiling hotness to contend with, which was much worse. After staring back at the fireplace for some time, another cold shower, and another cup of tea, I could see on my phone it was 2 a.m., and from sheer exhaustion, I nodded off. Suddenly, there was a very loud knock at the door. Bang! Bang, 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 bang. That sort of rhythmic pattern of someone who knows the occupant of the room. It's only me kind of thing. I jumped out of my skin and grabbed my phone. It was 4 a.m. on the dot, and I instantly thought of my friend looking for me. I went to open the door, and then paused. He would never have made that racket on the door. He didn't know where I was. He would have called me on the phone anyway. The knock was familiar, but aggressive, and my friend was far from aggressive. I heard the floorboards outside the door creaking. The person was pacing the small landing outside, rocking from foot to foot, impatient and agitated. I was sure it was a man. I slunk back to my hot bed, and sitting really still, I listened to the creaking outside the room. The creaking seemed to go away, but then came back. Someone was waiting to be let in, and I was again tempted to go to the door, when suddenly there was sound of a heavy metal latch being wrenched on the door, the kind you pull down and levers up on the other side. My side. Ka-chunk, 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 ka-chunk. Someone was punching angrily at the door to open it, thrashing at a heavy iron latch that was no longer there, as it had long ago been replaced by an incongruous Yale lock. The key was beside me, and the door remained firmly closed. But a man, a big man, was now inside the room, on my side of the door, a few feet from my head. I did what every self-respecting person under those circumstances would do. I covered my head with the bedclothes, lay very still, and listened as he slowly plodded this creaky floorboard way along the side of the bed and across the room towards the bathroom passageway. There was some shuffling about, and then all was silent. Under the safety of the covers, my temperature dropped, and I must have nodded off again. I emerged to golden daylight and a bevy of screeching gulls on the roof opposite. The room was still moody. I had yet another shower, contemplated what had happened, packed, and left the room for a very early breakfast. After I met my friend downstairs, I asked the receptionist if my room was haunted. She didn't bat an eye, and said, "Yes, it's one of the haunted rooms. Did you see something?" I told her what had happened, and she said 4 a.m. is the time things usually kick off. She then said that the Kingsmill room used to contain a rocking chair, which they'd had to remove because it would rock without someone being in it, and that freaked the guests out, so it was removed. When I came home, I googled the Mermaid Inn, and I was astonished to hear and see what there is on it. Scary big man in my room aside, that sensation of heat and agitation is definitely something I would never like to feel again. But then, as I say, everywhere and everyone and their mum is haunted, so the chances are I could. This story happened to me when I was 8 years old, and we had just moved into a house in Asheville, North Carolina. I was getting ready to go to sleep, and I had to pee, so I went to the bathroom. Right when I was going out, I saw an old lady in the shadows. I can't really recall any features. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks, so I went to sleep and forgot about it till the morning. We moved out of that house because of a water problem. Soon after we moved, I found out we got the house for free. The reason it was free was because my stepdad's friend's parents died in the house. I then realized that the woman I saw was his friend's mom. I haven't told a soul. I now live in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I'm a skilled skateboarder. Surprisingly, the house hasn't had any more weird experiences. Lucky me, I guess. Phantom Trucker. The time in my life, I was 16 years old, and I'm a girl. My mom and I drove up near the city to watch the high school boys' playoff basketball game, and they lost. We were on the almost 2-hour drive back home on the interstate. We were about 45 minutes from home when a semi-truck pulled up beside us. My mom and I were engrossed in conversation, not paying much attention to the truck. We were going through the small mountain range, well, more like hills. The truck was on our left side, at the car's blind spot. In the median was the mountains. My mom and I were talking when I noticed that she was getting frustrated. I asked, "What's wrong?" She said, "This truck is making me nervous. He won't pass me." I was turned slightly in my seat, facing my mom, with my left hand rested on the back of her seat. I glanced out the back window several times, but nothing ever struck me as odd. My mom sped up to 90 miles an hour. The truck stayed right at her blind spot as its lights lit up the inside of the car in a weird yellow glow. The truck never wavered from that spot. She slowed down to 40 miles an hour. Again, the truck never wavered from the spot on the side of her car. Now, she is getting scared. "Why won't this fucker pass?" she said, frustrated. The sound of the roar of the truck was so loud, I found that I was having to almost yell to talk to my mom. And then in an instant, there was silence. There was no light, no sound, and no truck. The truck would have had to slow down, get behind us, and change lanes to exit. There was no left lane exit, as the mountains were there. My mom sped up, trying to get home as we were both scared. Never once did my brain comprehend. I heard the truck. I saw the lights. I should see a truck, but every time I glance back, I don't remember seeing a truck. We were going through the mountains at midnight. When the truck disappeared, it was 2 hours later, and we'd only traveled 2, maybe 3 miles. During the time the truck drove beside us, there were no other cars on the interstate. As soon as it disappeared, there were cars in front of us, behind us, and traveling in the northbound lanes. We told this story to some close friends. Some say that years ago, a trucker fell asleep at the wheel and crashed into the mountains, dying. Which now, the phantom trucker haunts that section of the highway. I'm not sure if that's true or not. Others still think we hit some rip in the space-time continuum, and some think we were abducted by aliens. I'm not sure what that was, but I don't ever want to experience anything like that ever again. My name is Caitlin. Since I was a child, I've experienced things that to this day I cannot rationalize. This is a series of occurrences that happened when I was growing up as a child. The house on Broadview. When I was 5 years old, I had my first experience. That I can remember anyway. When I was about 3 years old, we moved into the house on Broadview. My great-grandmother Kyle passed away, and my dad inherited the house. One night, I was wide awake, just laying in bed. My sister had already fallen asleep. I could tell because how she was breathing very loud. We had bunk beds and I was on the bottom. And just out of nowhere, I saw the white mist just form. It moved slowly to our bedroom door, and it disappeared. I remember I didn't feel scared or anything. I was just amazed of what I had just seen. The next morning, I told my mom about what I saw, and she just ignored me because she couldn't use the excuse that it was just my imagination card, because I was never the type of child to make up stories to seek attention, let alone lie. For the next few weeks, I was hoping it would return, so I stayed awake as long as I could and just watched for it. Maybe a few months later, again, I was laying in bed halfway awake. Suddenly, I felt this cold hand caress my face and move my hair. Then I heard this high-pitched sound, but it sounded like it was talking, but it was too high-pitched to understand what was said, if that makes any sense. Of course, that made me wide awake. I didn't feel threatened or anything. After it was gone, I got out of bed excitedly to tell my mom of what had just happened. This time she responded by saying it was my sister, and I said it was not her, because I did not see her come up or down our bunk bed. When I was 12, we moved out of that house. The house on Maple Street. This house was a little over 100 years old, and in dire need of TLC. My father and my uncle, who lived with us, were remodeling the house. Maybe this was the cause of the paranormal events. Maybe a little after a month or two, I started hearing heavy footsteps walk across our room, coming towards us about every night. My sister Rachel and I still shared a room, and still had bunk beds. I remember feeling like I was being watched most of the time I was in our bedroom. I know there was something malevolent there because my iguana, Iggy, would sometimes blow up her dewlip, the skin that hangs beneath the lower jaw of the iguana, rise up her body, and start bobbing her head. In iguana language it means it's seriously working at intimidating someone or something. Or she would cuddle up to me, or she would just hide in her cage. I would leave her cage door open so she can get in, or out, whenever she wanted to. She was very tame and potty trained. I made friends with our neighbor's girl, Jessica, who was only a year older than I was. Anyways, we would hang out in our garage attic, in a space about 9 by 6 feet that was ours. The rest of the attic was packed with a bunch of things. We had a whole bunch of dirty rugs that my mom let us use so we wouldn't get our butts dirty. We drew on the walls, had a bowl of candy, knickknacks, posters of Backstreet Boys, and whoever else we liked as giddy young teenage girls, and board games. One day, we were playing Connect 4 in our hangout, when the blue bottom part slid over on its own, making all the red and black checker pieces fall out. We just started playing the game over again, and then it happened again. Thinking the game was just being cheap, we just started playing again. This happened 2 more times, until I looked up to Jessica to say something to her about it, or about finding something else to do. Right behind her, I saw an old woman. She was semi-transparent, with a gray or a white shade. I could make out some of her details, but I only glanced at her for a second, and she was looking at us with this piercing look. I shot up, and I told Jessica it was time to go. She asked me why, and I grabbed her arm, yanking her up, and told her just because. I had her start walking in front of me, so I was in between her and this apparition. I had this feeling like she wanted to hurt us, and if she was gonna harm someone, I would rather have that old woman hurt me instead. When we got out of the garage, I told her what happened. We never went up there again. Another incident is when I got up at 6 on a Saturday morning to help Jessica with her paper route. I was in the bathroom getting ready when I heard a light knock on the door, and the woman with a raspy voice asked if someone was in there. I just started shaking, staring at the door, which was the only thing between this mystery and me. I knew it wasn't any of my family because I would have heard footsteps walking towards the bathroom. As I mentioned, the house was very old, and you can hear practically every step someone takes. After a minute, I got the nerve to open the door and ran out with my eyes closed because I started thinking about the old woman in the garage attic. Another time, I was home alone. I was outside talking to Jessica's brothers. Suddenly, Caleb asked me, "Didn't I say I was home alone?" And puzzled, I responded, "Yes." He pointed towards my house and asked, "Who's that?" So I turned around and looked over, and I saw this solid white figure through the big kitchen window walk across the kitchen towards the hallway. I waited until someone came home before I would step foot in that house. My dad finally came home, and he was drunk. I know. I don't condone drinking and driving. I absolutely loathe the fact that he did such stupid things like that. But he had a problem and didn't want to change. Anyways, I told him what I saw, and he put his index finger to his lips and said, "Shh. If you don't talk about it, it won't happen. Just ignore it, and it will stop." I should tell you that my dad was raised Catholic, and pretty much anything paranormal is demonic. The last distinct incident I had in that house was when I was laying in bed. I was on the top bunk, when all of a sudden I felt this feeling of dread, then cold, come over me. I sat up and started looking around. Immediately, I felt something like 2 hands forcefully shove me back into my bed. Then, a sensation that I was being held down, and a cold hand pressed against my mouth like it was trying to stop me from screaming. I could not move a muscle. I could not speak or scream. This happened 2 more times. I would just know it was going to happen the other 2 times, but I was too scared to get up. My logic was if it could do that, then it could do worse. And if I got up and tried running out of the bedroom, it would and could hurt me, if it got me. Or maybe it would do it to my sister. And of course, I didn't want that. Better me than her. So I stayed put and just allowed it to happen. My parents later on got a divorce, so Mom, my sister, and I moved to the house on Essex Circle. I'm not sure what happened in that house, but I have a feeling it was something horrible. I tried Google and came up with nothing, so sometime I will try to go to the library and figure it out. The house on Essex Circle. When I was 15, we moved in. I always felt like I was being watched, but not in a threatening way. Once I was on the computer down in the den, when all of a sudden the collapsible door that leads to the storage room inside the bathroom started shaking. The next day, I investigated why the door would start shaking like that, but there were no vents in the room. The window was shut and locked, so there wasn't anything that could have made the door shake. Once, I was inside my room sitting on my bed, watching TV, when a shadow formed right beside me in a crouching position. Then it stood up and dashed into the wall. Now and again, I would hear whispering. Jessica heard it, and so did my other friend, Kristen. I could never tell what was being said. I am still a little curious. Kristen's mom, Kim, took me home one night. When she pulled in the driveway, I was hesitant to get out, because no one was home yet. I was scared to be alone ever since Maple Street. Can you blame me? She asked me what was wrong, so I told her everything that happened at Maple Street, and what was going on here. So, she asked me if she could come in and have a look. Kim is a medium. So of course I let her. When she first came in, my great-grandmother Luther's jewelry box caught her attention. Kim described her down to a T. We had no pictures of her in that room, so there was no way she could have known what she looked like. And she had not been to the den, where my mom hung up a picture of my great-grandmother Luther, including the fact that she had emphysema. She walked around, and she said that great-grandmother Luther came around sometimes. There was someone else, but she couldn't tell who. But she told me I shouldn't be afraid of them, because they were just hanging out, and didn't mean to scare me. So we lived in the house until I was 17. After that, we moved to the house on Stafford Drive. The house on Stafford Drive. The only experience I ever had there was once when I was in the kitchen. All of a sudden, I felt this energy, so I looked over where it was coming from. Then I felt it rush at me so fast that I actually flinched. I have a story. One of many. It's really short though. So, I was on my way to pick my husband up from work. He works at Shamrock Foods. Anyway, the building, although it's along a string of buildings that are very large, is on a minor street. As I'm waiting for him with a friend of mine who was in the car with me, we decided to get out of the car because there was a lightning storm happening and we wanted to check out the show. I am a very observant person, more than most, and for no reason at all, since the streets are very dimly lit, I scoped out the street. Both ways. All that was along the street are street lights and very small bushes. Nothing there. There are no other cars parked along the curb, and there are no Shamrock trucks either. Anyway, as my husband is walking towards the car, we all get in. I am in the driver's seat. My husband is in the passenger, and my friend in the back is behind me. As I am pulling away from the curb, I check all of my mirrors, and then all of a sudden, in my side mirror, I see a guy stopping suddenly, and my friend straight up says, "What the fuck? Did you see that guy?" I did. But the weird part is, I didn't see his face. He stopped abruptly as I was pulling away, and the weirder thing is, he had a child's backpack in front of his face. And as I pulled away, he very slowly pulled it down in front of him. I mean, what in the actual fuck? I never saw nor heard anything. No footsteps, no nothing. There were no hiding places. This all happened in the span of 20 to 30 seconds. Scared the living shit out of me. The thing that scared me the most was that I was completely oblivious to this. I now stay in the car and lock my doors when I pick up my husband. Here's the background on this story. We had this cemetery that was our playground. There were a lot of mausoleums there. We made up a story about witches, ghosts, and things that go bump in the night. Now, it was Halloween night, and my older brother got mad at me, 'cause I was little, and he wanted to get to our aunt's house. She was having a party for the kids, and putting on a show. We were both very excited. Well, he ditched me, just as we got out of the view of our house. I was very upset. It was really dark outside, and I had to get to our aunt's. I remember I didn't really know how to get there from where I was, but I knew where the cemetery was. I also knew that her house wasn't far from the gate of it. I was at an area where, if you were on foot, you could get into it. Problem is, there was a brick wall all the way around it, with tall railings on top of the wall. In a way, it didn't matter to me. It was the wall. I couldn't see over anyway. I really was scared and didn't want to go in there. I didn't want to go home either. I really wanted to go to my aunt's that night. So I took a shaky breath and stepped in. I was terrified. I just knew I was going to meet a ghost or a witch was going to come and get me. I hid behind gravestones and would run to the next one. I kept hearing things, and just thinking something was after me. I just kept going, and when I saw the gate, I ran as fast as I could to get out of there. When I did, my brother saw me coming out of the gate. He freaked out and said, "You did that! How?" I was the hit of the party because of what I'd done, but now I can't go into a made-up haunted house. Never have been able to, and they just freak me out. I'm not sure how or where to start this story, as it is something that still makes me wonder. I am in a long-distance relationship with another girl living in Latvia, I myself being from Denmark. I have always been sensitive to things, so this is just one of the many stories that I could tell. My grandfather says I got it from my grandmother, jokingly adding that if I had lived 200 years ago, I'd have been burned at the stake. I tend to agree, but not for the reasons that he might mean. Anyways, this happened on one of my visits to Riga, the capital of Latvia. It is a beautiful city, and I can highly recommend going there. We had borrowed a flat from my girlfriend's friend, and that has become ours in a way. This was on my first visit to Latvia, and I was still overwhelmed with all the new things, but I was quite content. Admittedly, when we stepped into the flat, there was a heavy feeling. But as my girlfriend didn't seem too bothered by it, I decided to ignore it for now. I knew she didn't like my stories of times when I'd had encounters and such. This happened on the fourth night I was there. We had gone to bed late, As always, as I'm an insomniac, and she prefers to take advantage of whatever little time we get together. I guess it'd been a few hours, as I'd actually managed to fall asleep. So things are a bit blurry here. But I was woken up with a feeling of a weight behind me, grabbing onto my shoulder gently, and I could hear my girlfriend's voice calling my nickname, Bunny. It said 3 times, and I ignored. I was tired and sleeping for once. The voice didn't sound urgent, so I reckoned it could wait. When the weight came off of me, and I was once again left to my sleep, I heard her breathing behind me, and I spent the rest of the night semi-asleep. The following morning, I had bruises where hands had grabbed me. I covered it with a long-sleeved dress, as I didn't want her feeling bad about leaving them on me. We went to the cinema to watch a movie later, and I grew more and more concerned. So in the end, I decided to bring up the night's event for her. By the way, love, what did you want last night? I asked, and added a short apology for being useless. She looked confused. What do you mean? She asked. Well, didn't you try and wake me up? You called my name 3 times, didn't you? No, I didn't. I decided to drop it at that. But as the day went by, she seemed to drag out going back to our flat. She was avoiding it. When I finally got her to come home with me, we had gotten what we needed for a cleansing. I did the ritual, while she followed closely. It sounds cliché, but something heavy was lifted from the flat. It was lighter, and the air was easier to breathe. Now, one thing that you need to remember about Latvia, it was part of the Soviet Union. A lot of atrocities happened there during the occupation. The flat we use is just a few hundred meters away from the corner building, the building that the KGB used as a headquarters in Riga. That building revolves around another one of my experiences, but that is for another time. The building has recently been opened for the public, and with it, it's become easier for the older generation to talk about what happened in the past. The friend who owns the flat got it from her grandmother, who literally left it in the middle of the night. No explanation. Here, 2 years later, the old woman finally opened up about why she left. And yes, it did have something to do with the KGB. She told her granddaughter that she knew the people who had lived in the flat in the past. Not the owner before her, but the owner before them. Those people owned the flat during the occupation. It was a small family of the middle class. They were luckier than some, that's for sure. But they were also defiant, something that was punished severely in the Soviet Union. People were deported in the blink of an eye. Torture wasn't unheard of, and executions happened as well. I'm sure a lot more stories can be found online, and really, do read it. Latvia has such an interesting history. But this particular family apparently had 3 members, a man with his wife, and their son. All 3 disappeared. There were signs of a fight in the flat, so it was most likely not willingly. Places can hold residue of things that have happened in the past, especially if that thing was something extreme. I can't help wondering if whomever grabbed me could have been the residue of the child calling for help. Mother-in-law's scary house. I've been going to visit my husband's family ever since we just started dating. We had only been dating about 2 months when I first went with him for a visit. It's about a 5.5 hour trip from Oklahoma to Louisiana. My now husband had never told me anything about his parents' house, except that it was big. We arrived, and it was late at night. Well, after midnight. His mother had already had a place for us to sleep. We put up our bags, changed into our pajamas, and crashed for the night. We woke up really early, ate breakfast with the family, and I got a good look at the house. It was a rather large, one-story home. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a huge kitchen, formal dining area, and 2 rather large living areas. In the back, when exiting the back door, is a breezeway. A few steps out the back door, under the breezeway, there is a shed, which is just a large room with a bathroom that isn't in service, and a regular room. This is connected to the garage through a door. I have always been sensitive to the paranormal. I get that from my mama's side of the family. Also, if there is something or someone that is weird or creepy in a 50-mile radius, you can almost guarantee it will find me. I get that from my mama too. I immediately began noticing weird feelings and tinglings. I could feel these things, especially from the middle bedroom. My now mother-in-law had an old antique bed in there. We tried to visit as often as possible, on average once a month, sometimes more or less. I hated the middle bedroom. I refused to go in there, and hated to walk past it, especially at night. Unfortunately, I had to walk past the room to get to the bathroom. I'd walk out of our room, tiptoe a couple feet from the doorway, take the biggest breath I could inhale, and sprint past the room with all of my might. It sounds stupid, but I'd see people in the doorway that were not there, and I'd see arms reach out for me. It was Thanksgiving break. My husband's kids came to Oklahoma for the break. We ended up leaving early and spent the holiday with his family. His kids at the time were about 4 and 6 or 7. The oldest, his son, the youngest, his daughter. Both of his kids are very well behaved for the most part. We made the trip back to Louisiana, and of course, it was late when we arrived. The kids gave their Nana and Papa hugs and kisses, and then we announced that it was time to change into PJs and get ready for bed. Both of them are in very good moods, bouncing around like crazy kids playing. My husband's daughter asked, while pulling out her PJs from her suitcase, "Daddy, where are we sleeping tonight?" The room they slept in was the middle bedroom. As much as it crept me out, they seemed to be fine in there. They have a small TV that they watched until they fell asleep. My husband responded, "In the middle bedroom, of course." His daughter threw her pajamas and threw herself on the floor, beginning to throw the most terrible, screaming, crying, and kicking fit. At this time, he and I had been dating for about 2 to 3 years. She had never thrown a fit with us ever. I was about to scoop her up and tan her hide. My husband shook his head and said, "Don't spank her yet. Let me talk to her first. This is very out of character for her." He picked her up, took her into the front living room to talk to her. After about 10 minutes, my husband walked into the den where I am playing with his son. He said, "Brooke, can you come here for just a minute?" I got up and followed him to the front of the house to the living room. His daughter was sitting on the couch, her blue eyes big and red from crying. I sat down beside her, and my husband said, "Okay, sissy, tell Brooke what you told me." Her tiny, pink lip quivered, holding back her tears, which broke my heart. She said, in such a tiny voice, I hate the middle bedroom. I asked why. She said, because I can't sleep in there. I looked at her concerned and asked again, why? She then stated, because the people keep me awake at night. I asked, what people, baby? She then whispered, the people that live in the room. They walk around all night and grab my feet when I try to sleep. A tear rolled down her face as she continued, I'm scared in there. I grabbed her in a bear hug and said, oh baby, you never have to sleep in there again. For the next several years, when we would go visit, they would make a pallet next to our bed. The next time we went to visit, I was talking to my husband, voicing my concerns about the house, afraid I'd sound like an idiot. We were in the shed, attached to the garage, looking through some boxes for his mom, trying to locate something. He picked up a box, opened it and said, I haven't seen these in a while. He then pulled out the scariest looking garden gnomes. I am not a fan of garden gnomes. I'm not scared of them, but I was scared of these. I told him to put those away. He closed the box, pushed it aside, and we continued searching for the thing his mama needed. After locating it, we took it in to her. We then went back out to the shed, and my husband was reminiscing on some of his old things in there. We walked into the garage, as there were 2 more storage rooms in there. When entering the garage, I had never been in there with a vehicle parked before. I gasped and whispered, there is someone here. My husband looked at me and asked where. I pointed up to the ceiling and whispered, ghost. He looked a little freaked out, but he figured he might as well tell me. He said that years and years ago, his parents' house used to be an old shotgun house. The man that I saw had purchased it and built onto it, building this large, beautiful home, including the shed and garage. In the garage, he built an engine hoist. After finishing the home, he hung himself from the engine hoist in the garage. That freaked me the fuck out. But it made a lot of sense. So later that night, I made my way to the bathroom to tinkle before bed. I did my normal routine, snuck down the hallway, and sprinted past the middle bedroom. I was coming out of the bathroom, running past the middle bedroom again. I was just a couple feet from our bedroom door when I saw it. Sitting to the left of the bedroom door was a creepy, pink-cheeked, smiling gnome. I screamed and ran past it into the bedroom, closing the door behind me. My husband sat up in bed and asked me what's wrong. I am angry, of course, and asked him why he would scare me with one of those fucking gnomes. He looked at me confused and said, I didn't. I then asked why the fuck was one outside of our bedroom door. He shrugged, walked to the bedroom door, opened it, and said, where? I snuck up behind him, trying to look around him, but I didn't want to get too close to the gnome, because it gave me bad vibes. That's when I saw that the creepy little gnome that I could clearly see from the light of the bedroom had vanished. I didn't sleep a wink all fucking night. Every time we visited that house, it was always something. I'd see someone that wasn't there. I'd hear my name being whispered and even yell when no one yelled for me. I'd hear footsteps and watch my mother-in-law's knickknacks rattle on the tables like they do when someone walks through the living room, but there would be no one around. On this particular visit, I had been grabbed 2 times. Once my arm, the other time felt like someone grabbed me on the leg, distal to my knee. When I looked down to see no one had me, I could clearly see my jeans were bunched up. It was later in the evening. The sun had set, but it wasn't quite dark yet. I drove up the road to get some cigarettes. When I got back, I walked towards the back. That's the door we used to go in. I saw one of my in-laws' dogs sitting in front of one of the porch benches, just looking at someone sitting there. Like I had said, it was getting dark, but wasn't all the way dark yet, so the person sitting on the bench was just a silhouette. Of course, I thought it was my husband, sitting outside as he often does. I was about to open the chain-link gate to enter the breezeway, and I said, "Hey baby, what you doing?" I saw his head turn towards me. He stood up and walked away from me. The dog followed him. Turning the corner to the back of the house, confused, as soon as he disappeared around the back of the house, my husband walked around the corner from the back of the house, and he smiled at me. I can see his features. I screamed, "Who the fuck was that?" He jumped into protective mode and said, "Where?" I told him what I saw. He said he didn't see it, but that he believed me. We decided to move to Louisiana, to be closer to his family. My parents took a mini vacation to Hot Springs, Arkansas. After a few days there, they decided to make a detour to Louisiana to visit me. They had never met my in-laws, nor had I told my mother anything about the house, except that it is big. I gave them a tour, and we all sat down together and visited for a few hours. My mother-in-law invited them to stay the night. My dad said that would be great. My mother interrupted, but said, "Yes, but we couldn't possibly intrude, and we've already got a hotel room," which I knew they didn't. My mom then turned to me and said, "Let's step out for a cigarette." I comply, and walk outside behind her. She walked over to my dad's truck and sat in the tailgate. We light our cigarettes, and then she said, "Why didn't you tell me about the house?" I asked innocently, "What do you mean?" She repeated, "Why didn't you tell me it was haunted?" I laughed, not surprised my mom sensed it. Shortly after that, we moved back to Oklahoma. Not because of any of the hauntings. My mother-in-law got rid of the antique bed and got bunk beds for the kids. It did help with the middle bedroom. It didn't stop anything, but it did help. I've always loved horses and ponies, so it should come as no surprise that I collected all kinds of pony and horse toys and collectibles. By the time I was 16, I had a sizable collection, which included many that had voice boxes and said things. I had tossed a bunch of new arrivals in my closet one night, in a hurry to get downstairs for dinner after a trip to a local thrift store. They were, of course, forgotten, and some dirty clothes fell over them the next few days. That weekend, I went to clean up and organize my closet. To start with, I reached up and started pulling the boxes of ponies and horses from the shelf. My foot slipped, and as I tried to stand on the assortment of stuff on the floor, suddenly, I heard a muffled voice exclaim, "Get off me!" I looked around, confused, and repositioned my feet slightly. As I reached up again, I heard the voice, more sternly, cry, "Get the fuck off me!" Startled, I leapt back out of the closet and searched the upper floor for one of my brothers. I was certain one of them was messing with me, but I was the only one on that level of the house. In fact, my brothers were not even home. I shrugged. As I went back upstairs to work on my collection, I stepped firmly onto the mess on the floor, determined to get the last of the boxes down, when again I heard a voice cry, "Bitch, get off me!" I was angry now, so I put down the boxes and began to toss the clothes into my hamper. Finally, I found a bag under them all. It had several My Little Ponies, and I think a few were called My Pretty Ponies. I found nothing else under the clothes. I untied the bag and began looking at the ponies. I squeezed each one to see if they had a voice box. I found 3 with them. The first made noises that told me the battery was nearly dead, or the box was damaged. The second did not make noise at all, but I could feel the box inside. I picked up the last one. It was kind of lime green, with a molded carousel saddle and flowers on its back. I squeezed, and it promptly pronounced, "Stop that!" I dropped it in shock and stared down at it. I was certain at this point that I must be losing my mind. I gingerly picked it up and took it to my mother. I found her in her room, reading a book on her bed. I was afraid she would only confirm that I had lost it, so I shuffled my feet and stared, obviously upset, at my feet. After a minute or two, she noticed me. "Hey, why don't you come in and visit with me?" she asked, as she set down her book. "Did you get anything good last time you went shopping?" I slowly sat on her bed and held out the pony. As she took it, I burst into tears and told her that either I was losing it or it was the demon pony. She asked what I meant, and I told her what had happened. "I wondered why you ran downstairs earlier," she said, as she looked at the toy in my hand. "Let me see it." I handed it to her and looked away, afraid it wouldn't say anything, but at the same time more afraid that it would. She squeezed it, and it let loose a string of vile things I would rather not repeat. Shocked, she set it down, but it continued, saying horrid things about every female in our family, not by name, but by title of relation. My mother turned to her bedside table and dug out her crafting scissors. She picked it up and began trying to puncture the toy. As she did so, its cries turned from vulgar insults to pleas for her to stop. Finally, she got one blade into the plastic and cut the thing in half, thus exposing the mechanism within. She cut the wires from the battery to the box, but it kept speaking. I ran and got my dad's hammer. We crushed the box until the voice stopped. Then we threw it away. The moral of the story? Carefully inspect things before you bring them home, especially if they are used. This is a true story that happened to my mother. Years ago, before I was born, people in our hometown told my mother, in the area where she lived, that if a person were to walk down the road near the old bridge at night, and a certain number of cars drove past, an old woman in old-fashioned clothing would appear beside them. Naturally, she shrugged this off, figuring it was just a story. But that night, as she walked down the road, she got the feeling she wasn't alone. When she looked up, an elderly woman in old-fashioned clothing was standing there. As they passed the old bridge, Mom knew something was wrong. One of the people who lived by there owned Dobermans, who would bark at anyone or anything that went by. But that night, as my mother passed with the old woman, neither dog made a sound. The woman asked my mother, "Aren't you afraid?" "No," she said. "I have a big light and a big knife." The woman smiled and then disappeared, and my mom took off up the road. Malicious attack. My boyfriend had just moved into a double-wide mobile home with a guy that he works with. I visited very often and was immediately thrown off by this house. There was something sinister there. I have always been very sensitive to the paranormal. Curious, I asked Jason, my boyfriend's roommate, about the creepiness of the house. He said that there had been several fatal car accidents in front of his house, as it's on the bottom of a hill on a well-traveled highway. I began to stay the night about every night with my boyfriend Mark. On this night, we were lying in bed watching Jay Leno when we heard Jason yell, "Hey Mark, come here." So Mark gets out of bed and walks out of our room across the house to Jason's room. "What you need, man?" Jason opens his bedroom door and says, "What?" Mark said, "You just yelled for me to come here." Jason shrugged and said, "No, I didn't." Mark said, "How weird. I know I heard you. Brooke heard you too." "Oh well, sorry. Good night." 2 nights later, Mark and I were in bed. Jason started pounding on the door. Mark yelled, "I'm in the middle of something. What do you want?" Jason yelled, "How the fuck should I know? You're the one that just yelled for me to come here." "No, I didn't," Mark said as we situate decently under the covers, telling Jason to come in. "Yes, you did, Mark. I heard your voice yell for me to come here. I promise you I didn't. But that's what happened the other night when you yelled for me." "It was your voice," said Mark. "This is weird. Sorry to interrupt. Carry on." Jason closed the bedroom door. Mark looked at me and I looked at him. I'm weirded out at this point. So since I was staying there almost all the time now, I didn't pay rent, but I kept the house cleaned and cooked for the guys. I only worked on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It was a pretty easy task. A couple of days later, the last incident had almost been forgotten. I was digging in the freezer, trying to decide what to cook for dinner. I heard footsteps walking up to me. I glanced down and saw bare feet standing on the other side of the freezer. "What's wrong, Jason?" I asked, because I knew those were not Mark's feet. I stepped back to close the freezer door, and there was no one there. I yelled for Jason, asking him what kind of shit is he trying to pull when he walks out of his bedroom looking really confused. I said, "Never mind," and ran into Mark's bedroom, visibly shaken. Later that night, Mark and I were cuddled in bed, watching Jay Leno, when he sat up and said, "Do you feel that?" I sat up, and the whole house is shaking. Well, more like rocking. Mark collected RC cars, and had about 5 small cars sitting on top of the TV. They were all rocking back and forth. What the fuck is going on? Does Jason have some girl over? I asked. He'd never shaken the house before, but I guess you never know. At that moment, starting from the left side of the TV, one by one, each RC car began flying off the TV at us. I was screaming, dodging, being hit, as Mark rolled over on me to protect me from the flying objects. Mark, still trying to be rational about this whole thing, when the objects are no longer being flung at our head, Mark got up, and he was pissed. He stormed through the house and pounded on Jason's bedroom door. After a few seconds, Jason opened his door. He'd obviously been asleep. "What the fuck, man?" Jason said he wasn't happy being woken up. The house was just shaking. Then my RCs were just flung at our heads. "Don't look at me. I have been sound asleep," Jason stated as he closed the door in Mark's face. "I don't know what the fuck is going on," Mark said, as he sat next to me on the bed. "There is something bad here. I know it. And I know for sure it doesn't like me." I stayed still bundled up in the blanket. I had started to feel even more uncomfortable in the house. I would come over when Mark got home from work, and would leave and go back to my parents' house when he would go to work. I was starting to get sick pretty often, but as soon as I would leave, I would be fine. Just to rule it out, I took a pregnancy test, and it was negative. I was beginning to get a lot more anxious in the house, and I could feel it. The feel of dread and despair would just overcome me. Jason and Mark were best friends, but the tension in the house had them at each other's throats constantly. I would try to do all the cleaning while someone was there because I didn't want to be by myself in the house. A few days later, I woke up and got ready for work. I could hear noises, what sounded like someone was rummaging around the spare room that was next to ours. It was used as a storage room for Jason. I opened the door, but no one was in there. It was probably just a mouse, I told myself, and walked into the bathroom to start my shower water. I was feeling very uneasy, but just tried to push it out of my mind. I got in the shower and was washing my hair, and I hear what sounded like a female voice. As I opened my eyes, the shower curtain fell in on me and wrapped around me. I could feel arms holding it on me and around me. I screamed and fought, trying to get out of it, but wasn't able to break free. Mark ran into the bathroom, and the shower curtain goes limp and fell around my feet. I leapt into his arms, sobbing how it tried to kill me. I made him stand in the bathroom, holding the shower curtain for me, so I didn't soak the bathroom, and so the entity didn't try to kill me again. After that, things began to get better for about a week or two. The tension began to lift, and the dread wasn't as severe. Jason's son was coming to stay with him for a couple of days, and asked me to clean the house really good. I kept the house tidy, but I was going to deep clean before his son arrived. The next morning, I decided to stay and clean while the guys went to work. I got up, since I was alone, and just had on my bra and panties. I sat on the couch and turned on the PlayStation 2, thinking I would play for a bit before I started to clean. I just got my game loaded up when I had a weird feeling I was being watched. At that moment, I heard a light knock on the door. Confused, I got up and looked out the peephole. No one was there. I shrugged and was about to walk back over to the couch. I heard it again, but realized it was coming from Jason's bedroom. I never went into Jason's room, so I just walked over to his door and whispered, "Jason?" No answer. I cracked open his bedroom door, but there was no one there. I took a deep breath, trying to not get freaked out. I sat back down on the couch when I heard the light knock again. I sat the controller down and turned my body to look at the door. I could hear a faint sound. I got up and slowly walked over to the bedroom door. Every so often, I'd hear a light knock, knock, knock. When I got a few feet from the door, it sounded like a very low whining and whimpering noise. I walked up close to the door, about to open it again, when it sounded like something flied against the door. I watched the door arch and bow at the instant pressure. Then it was followed by what sounded like claws being dragged down the length of the door. I staggered backwards in shock when the malicious clawing became like a violent attack to get out. I grabbed my purse that I kept next to the front door and ran out of the house in my panties and bra with no shoes on and drove to my parents' house. When I got home, I called my boyfriend and told him what happened, and he tried to rationalize it, but I refused to be there when no one else was there. That was one of the scariest things I've ever experienced. Possessed toy. My husband and I moved into a cute little house in town. My husband's daughter came to visit for 3 weeks. Since she was only 3, she wasn't in school yet. With her, my husband's mom sent a large box of toys. She is my stepdaughter, but I do refer to his kids as mine. The first night she fell asleep on the couch. My husband carried her to her room and put her to bed. And my husband and I went to our room that was right next to hers. 10 minutes later, she woke up, hysterical, screaming, and ran into our room. She wouldn't tell us what was wrong, just that she was scared. we snuggled her between us, and I didn't sleep a wink, as she turned sideways and kicked me all night long. This turned into a nightly occurrence. She'd fall asleep on the couch as soon as we'd put her to bed. You could set a clock to it. 10 minutes, and she'd wake up hysterical, crawl in bed with us, and kicking me all night long. After 3 weeks, we sent her back to her mama's house. I was cleaning house, and I went into her room to make her bed, and noticed a toy in the middle of her floor. It was a little box with kids on it, and sang the "Wheels on the Bus" in a very annoyingly chipper voice. I tossed it back into her toy box. At the end of the week, I had bought her some shirts and shorts. I went into her room to lay them on her bed, so she would see them there when she arrived tomorrow for another visit for 2 weeks. The toy was laying in the middle of her room. I grabbed it and tossed it back in the toy box, not thinking much about it. It probably just bounced out and I didn't notice it. She arrived the next day. I was hopeful, but 10 minutes after we put her to bed the first night, she woke up hysterical again. This was starting to get old. The next day, when my husband went to work, I asked her if she sleeps in her bed at her mama's house. She said, "Yes, but I have a TV in my room." The light bulb went off. I pulled out an old TV that we had and set it up in her room with a VCR. We went to Walmart, and I let her pick out a couple of movies and some posters to put in her room, hoping it would make it more like home to her. I let her choose where the posters went. She was happy, and so was I. That night, we put her to bed, turned on a movie, kissed her goodnight, and cracked her bedroom door. I'm assuming she fell asleep about 20 minutes into the movie, because 30 minutes later, she was hysterically screaming, running into our room. After a week and a half of this again, I was done. She woke up screaming. I wasn't sleeping a wink because of her kicking me all night long. I told her, "I'm going to go sleep in your room. I will prove to you that there is nothing to be scared of." I grabbed my pillow off the bed and went into her room. I closed my eyes and got comfy, and quickly drifted off to sleep. I was startled awake as I was yanked halfway down the bed. I sat up, and at the end of the bed, with my foot in his hand, was something I can only assume to be some kind of demon. His skin was a very dark red tint, with coal black eyes, and the large curly horns like the ones you'd see on a ram. His mouth was twisted into a sinister smile that frightened me to the very core. I kicked and screamed, getting my foot free, and ran out of her room, slamming the door behind me. I ran into my room. I trembled so hard, I slammed my bedroom door, fell against the door, and cried. My husband turned on his lamp, as him and his daughter are sitting in the bed, looking at me. She grabbed the blanket and pulled the covers back on my side for me to get in. She said, in the sweetest voice, "You seen him too, huh?" I tried to smile and said, "I did, baby, and you never have to sleep in there ever again." "Thank you," she smiled. My husband looked at me extremely worried and confused. I gave him a look of, "I'll explain later." At the end of the week, we had to send her back to her mama's. A few days after, I decided I wanted to watch a movie, but the movie I wanted was in my daughter's room. I slowly opened her door, and everything looked okay, so I walked in. A few steps in, and I noticed the damn toy was back in the middle of the floor. I sigh and bent over to grab it. Before I could grab it, it began to sing. However, It was not singing the wheels on the bus. The voice was deep and demonic, with a malicious tone. I couldn't understand what the voice was saying, but I didn't want to find out. I screamed, grabbed the toy, and threw it in the trash can outside. I called my husband and told him what happened. All he could say is, "That's weird. The batteries were probably going dead." A few days after that, we were sitting at the house, and my husband came out of his daughter's room, holding a movie in one hand and something else in his other. He said, "I thought you said you threw this away." There in his hand was a possessed music box toy that I did in fact throw away. I grabbed it out of his hand, ran outside with it, and set it on fire. After that, his daughter slept in her room every night when she came to visit. That was terrifying. The Invisible Hunting Party. This is a true story. It's not a scary one, not to me anyway. It was in fact quite thrilling. I've only told 3 or 4 people about it, and they have just given me a wry smile and said I was being fanciful, which I found hurtful. I hope that there are people out in the wider world who can relate to my experience, or at least enjoy the telling of it. My story happened back in 1973. I grew up in a little village in the darkest depths of the English countryside in the UK, all woodland and fields with other small villages connected by single track lanes. Our village was on the edge of a great wild wood which formed part of a 500-year-old estate. A ribbon of stony road, known as the Drive, wove its way out of the village, through the woods and parkland beyond, and then on to the great crumbling 14th century hall, surrounded by sinister dark lakes. The longer your driveway, the richer you were, and this was a long drive. All of the villages and land around had been owned by one family, and was magnificent into the 1930s, when the last of that family died without an heir. Left abandoned, nature exquisitely reclaimed everything. From childhood, I always loved the woods and knew them well. You never saw anyone, except maybe on Sundays, and certainly no cars at all. Dark and dense, with bracken and brambles, the little tracks made by badgers and deer quickly overgrew each summer, leaving the old carriageway, the drive, as the only open route through the woods. A big, crumbling archway marked the entrance, and as you passed under it, you entered a different world of labyrinthine greenery. My family had horses, and riding into the woods and the park was a regular habit. So very early one summer morning, I decided to take my favorite mare, Dill, and enjoy my favorite time of day in my favorite place. We had been out a while, and were heading home down the drive. I was enjoying the mist hanging low over the sea of bracken, the sun rising hot through the dark canopy of oak, and the air full of the perfume of wild honeysuckle. And suddenly I heard, distinct, high-pitched, and clear as it cut through the still morning, a single note. Was that a hunting horn? It was a long way off to my left. I would have dismissed it if Dill's head hadn't bobbed up to look in the direction of the sound. A few steps on, and I again heard. Dill's head was right up now, ears pricked, and she was scanning across the woodland. She knew that sound. She knew all about the hunt. My mother had taken her the previous winter and she'd had a brilliant time. That is definitely a hunting horn, albeit a single note, and not the warble I was used to hearing. But this wasn't hunting season, and if there was a meet of any kind, I would have known about it. Dale might have been excited, but I was really grumpy. These idiots were doing something they shouldn't, and heading our way to spoil my morning of bliss and solitude. Again, closer. I could hear the cacophony of hounds, the crashing of undergrowth, and shouting and distinct laughing, but I could see nothing. How can they be coming this way, through the impossible thicket of bracken? I just knew they couldn't do that. It was ridiculous. How could they be moving at such speed? Dill was well on her toes now, her head impossibly high, her nostrils flared to catch the scent of the company. We were both desperately looking up and down in the direction of the horn. They were obviously very close. Then very loudly, almost on us, I heard... Suddenly, I saw waves of bracken thrashing about just below us, and then... whoosh! They went through us. An invisible hunt went right through us. It was incredible. I heard it. I felt it. I felt the thundering of hooves as they crashed into the drive. I heard the shouting, the howling hounds, the heavy breathing of the horses. I felt the excitement and the fun, the heat of them. Every hair on my body stood upright, including the hairs inside my ears. It was over in a split second, and there was silence again. I felt almost as if I'd been taken away. Dill was frozen to the spot, and it took me a moment to get her to walk again. Obviously, I wasn't the only one left confused. I wasn't the only one who felt all of that. I saw nothing of the hunt at all, but for one thing. A few feet ahead of us, a great, gray horse lumbered up from the bracken to cross the drive, and over its flanks was a colorful banner. A figure of a woman was seated side saddle on top of it. The horse took one big, lolloping stride and vanished. Whatever the hunt was, it wasn't a modern one. Dill didn't perk up to her old self until we were almost home. I told my mother what I'd experienced, and she quickly dismissed it as daydreaming. But 45 years on, it's as real now as it was on that beautiful morning it happened. My story is not long, and probably not particularly creepy to most people. So, I don't know how useful it'll be to you, Killer Orange Cat, but it has always stuck in my mind, as it is the only time I can ever think of in my life that I have seen something with my own two eyes that I could not explain in some logical way. I have a twin brother, and we grew up Catholic. We had religious iconography up everywhere in the house when we were kids. Stuff like crucifixes and images of Jesus folding his arms, listening, or exposing his sacred heart. My brother and I shared a room as kids, and one morning we were getting dressed to go somewhere, possibly church, and we were talking as usual, when we both happened to glance at the image of Jesus with the sacred heart that was on the wall. We glanced at the same time, and, I swear, this is what we saw. He winked at us. We both fell silent, mouths agape, and looked at each other. Then we went screaming out of the room, running. I almost fell, terrified. We told our mom about it, and she said something like, "Well, Jesus just loves you," and was showing it. We accepted that, and it would be nice to be able to take it that way, but to be honest, it has always stuck with me. I told a deacon about it at a weekend church retreat we went to as teenagers, and asked if it could have been legit, or maybe some kind of a spirit, and he said that sometimes demons might try to deceive us into believing that such signs are legitimate, when they are in fact false, or mischievous, and to remain skeptical. I don't know about that, but I haven't forgotten his answer either, because to tell the truth, I don't know the cause of what I saw. Maybe it was just hysteria and a child's overactive imagination. That's what I try to tell myself. But honest to God, whatever the cause, I saw what I saw then, and it's the only time in my life that I was ever so sure I'd seen anything like that defied explanation, and it's burned into my memory. I still have that image, and sometimes my eyes catch it up on the wall, and I stare at it for a moment or two to see if it winks again, both hoping it would to confirm what I had once seen, and terrified because I don't know how I'd react if it did. Perhaps it was as my mother said, and I've just let him down one too many times now that I've grown. Who knows? Anyway, that's my story, and thanks for listening. I apologize, for this is a long story. This is one of the scariest things that have ever happened to me. About 7 years ago, when I was about 16 years old, and I was still in high school, I'm female by the way, a group of friends and I decided to go check out the old ruins of a town near the small town we lived in. A little backstory on this place. Way back in the early 1800s, there was a small town in this area, in the middle of the woods near this pretty large creek, and there were issues with the Native American tribe living in the area, and long story short, the natives burned down most of the town to regain the part of their territory back that had been invaded by the settlers, and ran the people who did not die in the fire out of the place. The place is notorious for being haunted. Everyone from our small town has a story of something that happened to them there. All that remains now is a bunch of foundations of the homes, and fireplaces, and some old rusty frames of furniture that haven't completely fallen apart after all the time that has passed. And rain. It rains here pretty much 9 months out of the year. We decided one night, being bored, and not finding anything else to do, that it would be a good idea for us to make the trek back there and see what we could find, and of course hope to see a ghost and have something scary happen. We got what we wished for. We parked, and after walking for about a half hour in the pitch-black woods, we finally found the old city. We walked around and looked at all the old brick foundation remains for about an hour, looking for any old stuff left behind. Finding nothing, we found the most solid foundation we could, and took a seat to talk with each other, after BSing for about another hour, and taking some pulls of the whiskey bottle my friend had brought with us. One of the friends that tagged along, Brandon, started acting like a fool, like he normally did when he had too much to drink. His girlfriend, Andrea, started to get on his case about him acting like an idiot, and had the bright idea to climb up what was remaining of a chimney and start pulling bricks off it and yelling, "Fuck with me! Fuck with me, fucking ghosts! What are you gonna do about this, huh?" And throwing the bricks at the other foundations. Yeah, he's a fucking idiot. Andrea begged him to stop doing that, and yelled at him for being disrespectful, and she said she was ready to go back. We all agreed, and so we dragged Brandon's drunk ass back to the car and headed over to Andrea's house. Andrea's house was about 30 minutes from this place, also in the woods, with the nearest neighbor about 1 to 2 miles away. We all took seats on the porch and continued to drink from the whiskey and have a good time. After a little while of hanging out on the porch, Andrea and Brandon started to argue again, and Brandon decided he was going to walk home and took off into the woods. If you haven't guessed by now, we hated drinking with him. We all sat there for about 15 minutes, figuring he would come back when he was ready, and realized we weren't coming after him. When he didn't come back, my friend James and I decided we were going to go into the woods and look for him. What we found, I will never forget. We went into the woods, just where the lights from the porch didn't reach, and there was Brandon, sobbing, sitting up against a tree, his white t-shirt covered in blood, and with deep slash marks across his face, neck, and arms. We ran over to him and asked him what the hell happened. He wouldn't talk to us and just sat there, his whole body shaking, and continued crying. Joe picked him up and carried him back to Andrea's house. We brought him back to the porch and began cleaning up his cuts and calming him down. When he finally calmed down, we got him to explain what happened. He said that when he walked into the woods, it became absolutely silent, and he could no longer hear us all talking and laughing on the porch. And when he turned around to look back to the house to see if we had gone inside or something, he saw nothing. Absolute darkness. He had literally just walked into the woods and should have been able to still see the house, and he saw nothing. Thinking it was just because he'd had too much to drink, he turned to keep walking, when suddenly something slammed into him, and he was on the ground next to the tree, the one we found him sitting up against. He said he could see nothing but blackness, and something grabbed him by his neck and effortlessly lifted him off the ground up against the tree. He looked down, and all he could see were 2 red eyes burning into his own, and smelled a sulfuric rotten smell coming off whatever it was. Whatever had him around his neck was raking him with claws on his arms, and finally dropped him onto the ground when he was about to black out from the lack of air. We walked up seconds later. Brandon is one tough guy who would never make up something like this. He doesn't take crap and is a no-nonsense kind of guy. He just gets a little foolish when he drinks too much, so this was completely out of character for him. Needless to say, we believed what he had to say. It still gives me shivers and goosebumps to this day thinking about it. We tried to rationalize what could have attacked him. Cougar, or bear maybe. We do live in a rural town, surrounded by forest. Maybe he fell, and made up the whole story. He was so shaken and terrified. I don't think that was the case either. We believe that all this was because of him taunting whatever lives at that old city we went to visit, and that creature followed us back to Andrea's house and attacked Brandon when he isolated himself from us. The strangest part to me is that he was so close to the house. I don't know how we didn't see or hear anything. Brandon never went back to the old city after that. We did, since we didn't taunt anything there or disrespect the area, and we didn't feel threatened. One night I was home with my mom. My dad was at work. He rode with his twin brother on this night. My mother had become very sick. She is chronically ill and has medicine she has to take to survive. I was worried because if she can't keep down her medicine, then it could become altogether a worse situation than just a stomach bug. It was late, probably 1 in the morning. I told her I would drive to Walmart to get her medicine. The drive is 15 minutes there, and of course 15 minutes back. I took my dad's truck since he had left it there. I returned home as quickly as possible and gave her the medicine. I walked from the living room where my mom was lying into the kitchen to wash my hands and pour me a pop. I looked up when something caught my attention. I had seen a slight movement, and then I spotted a man in jeans and a dark t-shirt standing in the yard, staring at me. I gasped, stepping backwards away from the window, when his position changed drastically. That's when I realized he wasn't in the yard. He was behind me. I turned quickly to find no one was there. I ran to where he was standing. No trace of anyone here. I raced down the hall, checking the bedrooms. Not a thing. When I walked back into the living room, my mama was stirring awake, starting to feel a little better. I told her about my ghostly encounter. She just stated, "That was weird," and we went to our rooms. The next morning, I woke up to a note, scribbled on a piece of paper on my nightstand. "I see you. I love watching you sleep. I am real, not a ghost." I sat up in my bed. My window was raised, and the screen had been pushed out. Talk about scaring the shit out of you. Paranormal ghost with roommate. Shortly after turning 19 years old, a friend of mine from high school and I decided to room together. We moved into a small 2-bed, 2-bath trailer house in town, in a quiet little park. We had been there for a few weeks when we began to hear creaks on the old floors when only we were home. One evening, we decided to go out, grab a bite to eat, and find something to do in town. I was in my bathroom and she was in hers. I was sitting on the potty doing my makeup when I heard a light knock on the door. "Yes?" But there was no reply. I shrugged it off and turned my attention back to my makeup. After about 30 seconds or so, there was another knock on my bathroom door. "Door's open, AJ. What do you want?" Still, she didn't reply. I turned back to my makeup, and before I could bring the mascara wand up to my eye, the doorknob began to rattle. Starting to get irritated with her shenanigans, I lifted my leg up and kicked the door open. There was no one there. Like I said previously, our trailer house was old. I could be in my room with the door shut and could hear her walking around in her room at the opposite end of the house. So when I screamed, "AJ!" I heard her answer in a sing-songy, "What?" Yelled, "What are you doing?" She yelled back, "Curling my hair." I jumped up from the toilet that was a makeshift chair for my vanity since my bathroom was tiny. I quickly sprinted down the hall. She turned to look at me as I entered her bathroom. She did indeed have her curling iron twisted around her hair. I asked, "Were you just messing with my bathroom door?" She smiled. "No." and you're not gonna scare me. We often scared each other for fun, but mostly jump scares. AJ is a terrible liar, so I knew she hadn't been in my room. I just brushed it off. I finished getting ready and went out for a nice night. A week later was the same thing. We were getting ready to go out and find something to do, but this time we were both standing in AJ's bathroom fixing our hair. We were talking, trying to decide what to do, when we both heard a noise. We glanced at each other, and that's when something caught my eye. I glanced in the mirror and saw a large man-shaped black shadow walk down the hall, past the bathroom door, and into AJ's bathroom. I dropped my curling iron and ran into her room, but there was no one there. "What was that?" she asked, frightened. "I don't know, but I'm done." I unplugged my curling iron and pulled my half-curled hair into a ponytail. AJ did the same and we left. After our night was done, AJ's boyfriend followed us home, and he checked the house to make sure there wasn't an intruder. Odd things would happen. The cabinet doors would open and close. We'd hear things that weren't there, and see things that weren't there. It was several weeks later. AJ had already left for work, and I was getting ready for my shift. My curling iron was in AJ's room. I had a bad feeling, and felt that I wasn't alone. My mom had always told me to pray when you feel like that, and that's what I did. I walked through the house towards her room, saying a prayer out loud. As I entered the hallway, I heard what sounded like a rattling noise. I stopped praying to listen, but there was no noise. I shrugged and began praying again, making my way to AJ's room. The rattling continued and grew louder. I paused just before AJ's door to listen again, and the rattling stopped. I rolled my eyes, thinking that it was all in my head, and began praying again. As soon as I began praying, the rattling started again, growing louder as I entered AJ's room. In shock, I quit praying, and the rattling stopped again. I started praying, and the rattling started again. It was her closet door. Her closet is a flimsy trailer house sliding door on tracks. It was vibrating. I stopped praying, and so did the closet stop shaking again. I started praying again, and the rattling restarted. I began praying louder, and the closet doors began to shake harder. I walked closer to the doors. The louder I prayed, the louder they rattled. I grabbed a pair of scissors off AJ's dresser, and now was standing within arm's length of the closet door. So now I'm screaming my prayer, and the doors are violently rattling, looking like they will pop off the tracks at any second. I finished my prayer with, "Through Jesus Christ's name I pray," and as I say amen, I rip the closet door wide open. I hear a faint, almost high-pitched, agonized scream as it faded away. I moved around her clothes, but there was nothing there. I decided I would wear my hair in a ponytail, and quickly left her room. The demon of my past. My family is a pretty normal one at best. My mom is a very religious woman. She's strict, but she's fair, and she has a heart of solid gold. My dad has seen a lot of crap in his time, but has remained probably the most easygoing, best guy I've ever met. Both are extremely religious, and there's a reason for it. When my mom was pregnant with me, They moved into an affordable townhouse to accommodate for the increase in commutative units, i.e. my brothers, sisters, and me. All was well at first, my half-sister getting straight A's, my other sister and brother getting along. Things seemed to be riding on a peak that would never end. That is, until I was born. My sister started slipping in school. My siblings started to fight. Things in the home became tense. In the weeks prior to my birth, strange things started happening around the home, but nothing really dramatic enough to cause alarm. Taps left running, lights turning off, you know. The typical small things that are in like every ghost story or movie ever throughout the history of time. This continued until right before I was born. My mother became extremely ill. She was going to lose both her life and mine, which during childbirth she did. They brought her back and gave me a few hours to live. This was such a shock to everyone because my mom is as strong as an ox, and prior to this, we were both totally healthy and strong. I fought, and I survived. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks. As I grew, so did this looming darkness in the house. By the time I was a couple years old, I had already gotten double pneumonia, which is in both lungs, not just one, bronchitis and E. coli, all of which almost killed me. Constant medical complications. This, coupled with the increasingly odd events going on in the home, drove my parents mad and urged them to seek help. Now, my parents don't like to talk about the next part very much, but through the years I have managed to get it out of them and my sister at opportunistic times. They eventually searched the house with a minister who came to do a blessing. The next thing my sister remembers is my parents burning everything in the home that wasn't of Christian heritage. A total purge. The minister blessed the house with oil, and after that, things returned to normal. When I asked my mom what had happened that had caused her to take such drastic measures, she went pale. A blank expression on her face, and she said, "We searched the attic and found what we found to be a satanic shrine with dead animals and dried blood over it. The previous tenants had been Satanists and obviously opened a portal, inviting something into this home which was poisoning us. When they went downstairs to discuss it in the living room, my mom was sitting on the couch and glanced down the hall at my crib, where from the shadows beside it, a hand reached out. Not a human hand by any means. My mom panicked and grabbed me, and that's when the purge took place. To this day, that story gives me nightmares, and it reminds me of another ghost who used to visit my half-sister. He called himself Abe. But that story, my friends, is for another time." The Creature in the Woods. When I was 3 or 4, we moved into our new house in a small quiet town on the eastern tip of the Fraser Valley, towards the Okanagan. My house was at the top of a mountain, so for the most of my childhood, it was all forest around us. Nothing but foliage for miles and miles. A woman down on the other side of the mountains was killed by a mountain lion, protecting her son in her own backyard. We saw all sorts of predators getting tranquilized and caged, and then transported away. Bears, lynxes, cougars, and all types of lovely animals just waiting to gobble up a chubby little kid like myself. So I became unfazed by nature's dangers, and knowledgeable on how to survive by myself at a relatively young age. My grandfather raised me and he was the most manly man you can possibly imagine. He hiked alone in Alaska's wilderness, traveled the world, fought in the war, you name it, and my uncles were definitely his sons. So me and my brother spent a lot of time building trails towards the river about 10 kilometers away, and tree forts and the like. It was great. As time went on, my brother focused on grown-up stuff, being 4 years older than me. So in turn, I spent more and more time alone in the forest, which I didn't mind. It was more for me. Being alone in the wilderness is a euphoric feeling. The more time you spend in there, the more you become one with your surroundings. You begin to recognize the movements of all the animals in the forest. From insects to predators, you almost develop a sixth sense for danger and the like. I came home from school as usual, changed, and went right into the woods to the fort I had built. It was situated between 3 trees on the edge of a giant drop-off. It was about 200 feet deep and a mile across. It was a sheer drop-off into rocks and trees, but an absolutely gorgeous view of nature, and my fort had a front seat view. When I entered my fort, it smelled horrible. Not like a skunk or bear or something, but like when you leave wet clothes in your hamper too long, like a dog took a bath in sewer water, and there was orangey brown hair everywhere. Big, matted clumps of it. But it wasn't any black or brown hair, as I'd seen those a million times. Things in the fort were strewn around. My blankets that had been on the floor were gone. I figured it was maybe just some coyotes, something like that, and brushed it off. I was just a stupid teen after all, so I stayed until the sun was beginning to set. Normally I didn't mind staying in the fort well into the night. I've always been a night owl. This time, though, I had just an eerie feeling like something wasn't right, and it had been super quiet all day. No chirping birds or woodpeckers. Nothing moving except for the gentle rowing of branches in the wind and the dancing of leaves. I remember it like it was for the first time. I felt how truly alone I was in those woods, and that if something wanted to, it could take me. No problem. I got spooked a bit and began walking home, constantly looking over my shoulder with this ever-growing sense of uneasiness. I swear, I felt the ground shake like some huge, unknown animal was bounding up the mountain towards me. Branches snapped in the distance, and I could hear something moving now. I hauled ass to my house, and as I was exiting the forest, I heard a very loud bang, like someone snapped a tree in half. I wasn't sticking around to investigate, though. I ran inside, locked all the doors and windows, and locked myself in my room upstairs, watching out the window at the tree line for whatever it was to explode out of the bushes and tear down my front door. But nothing came. That night, I heard a tapping on my window. I didn't dare open my blinds. The next day, when I went back to the fort, the whole thing was laying at the bottom of the valley. It had been ripped right from all 3 of the trees and seemingly thrown down the mountain. Now, as I said, I'm not here to bullshit anyone. If you don't believe me, go to the forest yourself and check it out. It's at the end of Buffalo Drive in Mission, BC. I moved out of there years ago, and the mountain is a little more developed. But walk in the forest about 1 kilometer, and take the fork to the right, leading to the sheer drop-off. You'll probably still be able to see all the plywood laying at the bottom, unless brush has grown over it. Hike down and take a look, and I promise it will be there. After that, many odd things happened, especially at night. I used to sneak out all the time, and go hang out with friends. When I come home some nights, I felt perfectly fine, and other times, I'd hear something crashing through the forest, or felt like someone was watching me. Sometimes pine cones would come falling down in the middle of the road, like someone was tossing them towards me, taunting me. I told my parents, but they just chalked it up to me as overthinking it. There was no animal capable of doing what I said. In their eyes, anyway. They did think it was odd when a couple of our dogs and cats went missing, but just figured it was predators. Deep down, I knew it was whatever that thing was that destroyed my fort. I never physically saw anything, but I heard it. I smelled it. And I swear I saw its eyes glaring at me through the corner of my eyes. I'll never forget that smell, or the feeling of pure terror as you hear something strong enough to rip an entire fort down so easily. I'll never go back to Mission. That town is plagued with many hauntings and paranormal events. People go missing all the time. One summer, it was so bad, a campaign was started saying, "Where are these men?" with a huge list of young to middle-aged males who had just vanished. Some can be held accountable to drug and gang-related issues, but some were just completely inexplicable. I believe David Paulides mentions a case or two in Missing 411. The city itself was built on the graves of innocent natives who lost their lives when the city was colonized. The paranormal crap I've seen there has made me shit my pants. Figuratively speaking, of course, but if I never have to go back, I'll die a happy man. The little girl at St. Mary's. Now, in Mission, not one person hasn't heard of the events that go on at St. Mary's School. It is now a native school, but back in the day, it was a Catholic reform school, where native children, taken from their homes, were tortured and beaten to death in order to purge them of their culture. Walking the grounds of St. Mary's, you will find some stone caskets, unmarked burial grounds, caves, foundations of old broken buildings, several graveyards, and some of my friends have claimed to find all sorts of strange things in the wilderness behind, including a small engine plane. In my later teens, we all used to have fires at the medicine circle, which is about 100 feet away from the school. The natives say it is an area of protection, and if you are to remain on the grounds overnight, that you are to stay in the circle. On each point, there was a giant cedar about 30 feet high, 4 of them, in the shape of a large square around the circle, which is about 25 feet wide, situated in the center of a large open field, and surrounded by tree line on all 4 sides. It's quite beautiful, but there's definitely a feeling of gloom surrounding the area. The single most well-known story of St. Mary's is the little girl. She was taken from her tribe and brought to the caves of St. Mary's, where they did all the tortures to her. She only spoke her native language, so when the priest tried to get her to speak English, she was beaten so badly that she died. Her soul never left those grounds, and every person that's been through there, including my fiancé, has experienced something strange, usually by her hands. On one night, no different than the others, we were all having a fire, smoking some of God's green, and crushing a couple wobbly pops, when I noticed a girl standing way out in the field. Now, mind you, there was about 10 people that all saw this happen. I figured the girl was our friend, Kimmy. She was rather small and always got super drunk and would wander off, so we all kind of watched her, and a few of the other ones who got a bit more, shall we say, inebriated. I began walking towards her, and saw that her back was turned to me. I yelled out to her, "Kimmy! Hey, Kimmy! What the fuck are you doing?" No reply, so again I yelled, "Kimmy!" as I walked towards her. What was odd was the closer I got, the further she moved, like she was walking perpendicular to me, but she didn't move at all. My friend saw me walking towards her, yelling, and from behind me I heard, "Dude, Kimmy is over here," as she came walking from the other side of the field with some friends that had gone to the car. So, who was I yelling at? I turned around, just to see the girl standing there, this time facing me. Her face was completely blank, like looking at a puff of smoke, and her body covered by a fog that began to rise quickly, began to disappear until she vanished entirely right before our eyes. Now I turned to my friend Taylor, and we immediately yelled out, "What?" A bunch of us lost it and started telling others who hadn't seen. That's when the stories went around about everyone's experiences there. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but the thing that haunts me the most, and barely even makes me want to type it, is that little girl followed me home. She came to me that night and woke me from a horrible nightmare. She had been chasing me, trying to kill me. I woke in a dark room and saw a figure. Just the outline, but there was definitely something there. I got this feeling like, now stay the fuck away from my school. So I did. I closed my eyes and prayed, and I never went back there after that. Except for one occasion, where I was forced to meet a friend outside the school in the parking lot. The school itself is like a giant horseshoe in shape. All the windows are the ones you swing open, and they're angled downwards, all along the inside. When I met my friend, about half of them were open. As we walked back to the Heritage Park, we heard a slam, like someone smacked a window loudly, and turned around to see all the windows were closed. We hauled ass, and that was the last time I ever stepped foot on those grounds. Those spirits are pissed, and they have every right to be. Who am I to go back and provoke them? They deserve to be left alone, in peace, the poor things. Humanity can be so cruel. It's no wonder there are so many evil things in the world, but with that comes the knowledge that we are not alone on this planet, or in this universe. There are truly nightmarish things waiting for us in the dark. So please, be safe out there. Always carry protection. And if you have to listen to music, use only one earphone. You never know who or what may be lurking in the shadows. To start, I'm Norwegian and a mother in my 30s. I have two beautiful children, a girl age 11 and a boy age 9. On the surface, we are normal people, but we all have a secret we feel we cannot tell to everyone. As a responsible adult, I've tried to make explanations to everything that is happening. But things have changed the past few years. 4 years ago, we moved from a dense and crowded area to a more rural area. We did a lot of redecorating, building, and general personal changes for our own thriving. Due to busy days, work, school, and general fitting in to a new area, we had problems sleeping, me and my children especially. We woke up from sleepwalking inside and outside, and my kids were having bad dreams. We started to talk together about doors opening and closing, shadows, and voices. I shoved it all away, saying it was the wind, our imagination, or our cat or dogs. The dogs are Alaskan Malamutes. Independent, smart breed that does not bark but makes a woo woo sound instead. They can also open doors and close them. However, after this conversation, my nights got worse. My husband found me standing in the doorway to our bedroom, staring up in the roof. "Who are you? Get out!" And then I went to bed. When going through the house, he found all inner doors and cabinets open. He wrote it off as me sleepwalking for the night. However, the next morning, my children kept thanking me for chasing the shadows away. I was clueless until my husband told me what had happened. The next few days were quiet, but everything started again soon. Even my children started to sleepwalk. I think mostly it was from being too exhausted from not sleeping well in months. We sat down again and started talking as a family. This time with my mother, who was informed of what had happened. She just listened to our trying to rationalize what has been going on, until she said, "Stop it. You know what is happening, Anita." She looked at me, sturdy. "No more nonsense. You know what to do." I said nothing for days, trying to make sense, not of the last few months, but everything. Sometimes I just know things. And I was remembering being a child, hearing and seeing things, and knowing. My husband took me aside after me being silent for so long. I usually talk echoes into people's ears, so he was worried. We need to talk. All of us. We rounded up as a family again, my mother listening in. I asked about the voices, the shadows, and the doors. They were not only in our house and rooms, but they were in our dreams, telling us to leave. I told my children the only way to make it stop is to make them leave. "But he is so angry, Mom," my son said. "He does not want us here," my daughter said. He was 6, and she was 8 at the time, and they have a history of creeping people out. But that is another story. They have found it to be one man doing this out of rage. This was his land, and his family would starve if he did not get his harvest. Oddly, this made sense, but we could not feed his rage anymore, so we made a strategy. We spent the summer farming the land, and the energy started to give in, but the anger was there still. We decided to unanimously tell him to leave us alone. This was our land now, our harvest. The voices started to turn to whispers, but they were still there. And I was so tired. My husband started to complain again about sleepwalking. I was angry and talking non-stop about the parasite needing to leave now. I was not strong enough, though. The man never left until my son had had enough. He saw me getting tired, sad, angry. He could not stand it anymore. One night, he guided me back to bed. My husband tucked me in, wanting to cry. This has been happening on and off during a year. I remember a kiss on my cheek, and then hearing someone screaming bloody murder, but I was too tired to get up. Not a minute earlier, they were all getting me to bed, and in the living room, my son was shouting like we had never heard him. My husband met him on his way to bed. "He is not coming back now," he said. On the top of the stair was his sister. "Are you sure?" "Yep." They went to bed, leaving my husband alone. He spent the next 2 hours closing every door, drawer, window, hatchet in the house. Everything that could get opened was open, and if there was content, it was dragged out and thrown on the floor. This has happened before, but not to this extent. The strangest part was when he went to close the front door. The property gate was unhinged and thrown on the road. 180 centimeters by 180 centimeters. Heavy, double wooden gate. And in our gravel yard, there was a strip of gravel in an odd color. It was freezing cold. We own this property now. Story 2. As told before, we are not a normal family. We may seem to be, but they are both sensitive, and they share many of the same abilities. But my daughter, A, is sensitive to how people feel. If they are going into a difficult period, are they getting sick, and so on. It is like she can see right through sometimes, even things we do not know ourselves. My son, M, had had imaginary friends his whole life. The kind that seem to know things they shouldn't. He sees energies and spirits. I have some of these senses, but A and M are more sensitive than me, and as a believer mom, I've chosen to support their visions and answer their questions, or at least as well as I can. Ever since we moved 3 or 5 years ago, there's been a neighbor we were warned to stay away from. He is in his 30s, tall and badass looking. He does drugs. He has killed someone. He has been to jail, they all tell me. We, however, find him pleasant and nice, so we decide to make our own opinion. Besides his looks, he is a true gentleman. Because of his rumors, we were a bit reserved at first, but we have learned to let more go after a while. He has even started to accompany my children to and from school when he can. For a period of 2 years, he followed them home safe because of a neighbor being creepy friendly with many of the children, and he did not want A and M to become victims to this man. Let's call Mr. Badass J. After 2 years of friendship, my children start to ask him strange questions. They were very scared for his mental health, and we knew he was struggling. He answered the best he could, but after a while, well, this was the beginning of the end. "Why don't you work?" "I'm on disability." "Are you sick?" "Kind of. It is hard to explain." "Is it because of your dad?" "Your nightmares. Do they make you sick?" "How the—" "We know your dad hurt you. He drank a lot and gave you bad dreams." "Does he still hurt you?" "Can we make it stop somehow?" My dad has been dead for years, kiddos, and you cannot change the past. "No, but we can make you stop what you're doing." "I'm not doing anything, sweetie." "Then why do you want to choke to death? We have seen it." "Have you been in my house?" By now he was terrified, angry, and close to our home. "No, but we have seen how sad you are, and lonely. Then we had the same dream last night, and were so scared to lose you." They broke down crying and went inside our house. Jay called me right away, furious and scared, thinking we were spying on him or something. I waited out his rage, and he started sobbing. "They've fucking seen the rope." "No, Jay. They have never been in your house, and they have never seen the rope. But they woke up at the same time last night. They dreamt of you, walking up a staircase. The next second, you were hanging from a roof, choking. The worst part was how you did not die. The dream felt like forever to them, and there you were, gasping for air, and they could not help you. In their dream, you were solid, and they were mists. No matter how hard they tried, they could not support your body or get you down. He is panicking in between my words, still sobbing. You know about this? Yes, I do. And suicide makes him win. There was silence for a while, and then a sigh. And the sobbing stops. Dad? I love you, man. We all do. Coming for dinner tomorrow, then? Story 3. The alarm went off. I always set it to make sure I get home in time. I was tired and easily lost track of time. On a table inside my workplace sat my 2 children, coloring. Let's go, I said. We all smiled and looked forward to getting home. The air was cold, and I needed to scrape ice from my car windows. We sat in and started our way home. Need to be careful today, babies. It's going to be slippery. I smiled again, reassuring them I was not going to rush, especially since we lived 30 minutes from my job and in a rural area. Going home, we can choose from 2 roads. The main road, straight and fast. No, not tonight. I took the more scenic road. It had some turns, but the road was good, and it had a slower speed limit. So I figured we could have some car family time. I shut off the radio, and we started singing some songs together, and talking. Now up a hill, and around the turn, we were getting to a bridge, not too far from home. However, we were not getting there quickly. In the middle of the turn, we met a speeding car. It swirled in the middle of the road, knocking my car into a ditch, turning my car head up. I frantically looked for my kids in the back seat. My 9-year-old boy was screaming from pain, and my daughter was non-responding. I looked at her eyes. I started sobbing. Gone. Then I screamed. Sadness. Adrenaline. I don't know. I was trying to reach my son now. I couldn't. I was stuck. Panic. No. Do not panic. My body, I'm hurting. No, it's getting numb. I try to tone into my son's screams, just to stay aware, to make sure he is still alive. It felt like forever. The pain on my body, in my heart. I was bleeding out. Suddenly, I could smell a familiar smell. My grandmother's perfume. My son's screams faded, and I could hear her sing to me, a familiar child song. She was cooking in her kitchen, making soup. She served me a bowl and set it in front of me, kissed my forehead, and stroking my hair. Time to go home now, love, she said with her soft, warm voice. It got dark for a long time. Then, I heard a piercing sound. My alarm. My kids, coloring by the table. They look up at me, slightly smiling. Cheeky. Guess we take the main road today, my daughter said. My son started giggling, like this was a practical joke they both had played on me. The strangest part was how I found that a speeding car had swirled off the back road the same time we were going home that night. A couple of kids got hurt tumbling down a ditch. It was a close call, but luckily, nobody died. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. Feel free to share this video with someone you might think will enjoy it, and leave me some comments in the space below. Feel free to follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter. As I mentioned in the opening, I didn't get 100 submissions, but I also didn't get all of my submissions into part 1 of my video. If I didn't use your story yet, don't fret. It will appear in a later part. For now, have a happy Halloween. And on this Halloween, be extra careful to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a killer orange cat might be hiding. Good night, and happy Halloween.